Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Beyond the Yard HBCUs Driving Real Change for Our Communities, a conversation panel brought to you by Blavity Inc. and in partnership with Mountain Dew's Real Change Opportunity Fund. My name is Frank Tramble. I am Vice President and Chief Communications Officer for Howard University and your moderator for this conversation. As well, I am also an entrepreneur and the creation of an organization here in DC called DC Run Crew that is geared toward inspiring people to change their mindsets in positive ways for over a physical activity. And so we're really excited about that. So today our esteemed panel will discuss how the transformative power of the HBCU experience sets up students to create their own businesses and become entrepreneurs. This is an exciting time for Black entrepreneurship. African Americans have more options today to pursue all sorts of opportunities across various industries. Never before have we seen such vast amounts of support for Black entrepreneurship, both in terms of breadth and of depth. Support is coming from the wide number of institutions who are providing a variety of assistance to ensure Black entrepreneurs have the resources, the knowledge, the experiences, and the networks needed to succeed. We have to thank PepsiCo for pledging $400 million and Mountain Dew for pledging $1 million to support Black entrepreneurs by providing financial support to students who help transform their dreams into reality. We are truly witnessing a sea of change in the landscape of Black business ownership. Now, of course, there are still significant challenges that we should acknowledge. Challenges that HBCUs have been addressing for more than 100 years. To take advantage of the momentum we are seeing today, we have to come together for conversations like this to address those problems, to generate solutions, and to ensure that we are sustaining progress in this critical area. The truth is, all of the challenges Black Americans are facing today are intertwined. You can't talk about entrepreneurship without understanding the various challenges that are either stopping people from accessing their entrepreneurial dreams or what is fueling more Black Americans to become an entrepreneur in the first place. To address any of these challenges, we have to address all of them, both individually and collectively. The issue of Black entrepreneurship is central to the wealth gap that continues to cause so much division and segregation in our society. By empowering Black men and women to become business owners and entrepreneurs, they can personally maintain more of the wealth that they generate and pass it on to future generations. As Black communities become wealthier and they become more economically secure, we'll see all of these other inequities and injustices start to diminish. Of course, we'll talk about all of this and more on the panel, but I first want to introduce all of our panelists, and we'll start with Dr. Wilbon.
Hey, Frank. My name is Tony Wilbon. I'm the Dean of the School of Business at Howard University. Happy to be here, and I think this is a very important topic. I look forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon. I am Professor Latanya White. I teach entrepreneurship and management courses at Florida A&M University. But I think more importantly, what brings me here and what I look forward to discussing today is the doctoral research that I've done on the racial wealth gap and its relationship to Black entrepreneurship and what that means for future generations as we move into these conversations about not just generational wealth, but a term referred to as dynastic wealth that really looks 3 generations down the line with a different sort of intentionality. So I'm looking forward to it.
Good evening. I'm Torrance Reed. I'm the IT behind HBCU Wall Street, and we're here to sow seeds of entrepreneurship change at the HBCU level.
And my name is Jamaris Payton, the second half of HBCU Wall Street, 2-time graduate of North Carolina A&T State University. Also the author of HBCUnomics, which basically in a nutshell is a catalyst for what we're talking about. It talks about what HBCU Wall Street have stood on for almost 5 years. And we're looking forward to having this discussion about how HBCUs at large can be major drivers in their community.
Thank you all for being here. I'm excited about this conversation. So I want to start off with a stat. 34% of Black business owners start their businesses because they want to be their own bosses. I found that to be interesting, and I want to think about what drives Black people to becoming an entrepreneur and why do we think that is? Let's start with you, Dr. Wilbon.
There are, again, a host of reasons. I think that if we're looking at from a student perspective, I think there is a few things. One is the desire to be independent. A lot of students, particularly in schools of businesses, have gone through a series of internships and programs where they're preparing themselves for corporate life, and they're starting to realize that life is not for them anymore. They would prefer to do something a bit more independent, have some opportunity to have some autonomy about how they control their day, their life, their decision making. And they see a lot of people who are successful in entrepreneurial ventures, and they want to emulate that. So I think that's driving a lot of the internal desires for students in particular. But I think even outside of that, even if you're not in the educational space, there are a host of examples of people who are getting rich through entrepreneurship, and people think that they can do the same thing. So they're looking for opportunities to go out, seek ventures, develop ventures. The opportunities to do that has become a lot easier through things like software applications and so forth. So it's just something I think that's on the forefront of people more so than it has been ever in recent years.
I totally agree there. Professor White, what do you think?
I would first, of course, like to build on Dr. Wilbon's point and pull out this concept referred to as necessity-based entrepreneurship. And so it looks different. The necessity looks different if you're a student or if you're a single mom or if you were laid off due to COVID. So there is one point of entry into entrepreneurship where I need to pursue entrepreneurship for whatever reason. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's this concept referred to as opportunity-based entrepreneurs. And so there's a continuum there because we may enter into entrepreneurship because I need to pursue another form of income or wealth creation. But at some point along that journey, I need to be able to recognize that there's an opportunity for me to build a business around either my skill set or demand in the marketplace. And so the historical and the ancestral narrative that Black people bring into the entrepreneurial journey is often at this point of necessity, but because of our resourcefulness and our passion and our skills and our talents, we can tend to lean more towards opportunity-based entrepreneurship. I think we have to do a bit of a better job to cultivate that so that we can become opportunity-based entrepreneurs before we need to, or before we're forced to pursue entrepreneurship, if that addresses your question, Frank.
Oh yeah, I think that you make an extremely good point, and and a great segue over to HBCU Wall Street to talk a little bit. Were you necessity based or were you opportunity based, and how you guys came to creating this organization?
I think it's a twofold, right? So I think one of the reasons, the main reasons, the drivers behind us creating this, right, is that we got into corporate America like most people right after school. And then you kind of have this aha factor, like, well, it's not exactly what I expected, whatever that looks like for you. In addition to that, I read a book that really kind of just changed my framework on like what entrepreneurship is, what investing is, and business is. And then I ended up reading another book, which Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? And then what it did, those two books connected the dots on what entrepreneurship is, what investing is, starting businesses, self-employed is. And then also seeing the impact that Reginald Lewis had as an HBCU graduate, someone I knew absolutely nothing about, and I went through an HBCU, right? So when we started this organization, we wanted to bring both of those two worlds together. One about the importance of using entrepreneurship and ownership, right, to build wealth, close these wealth gaps, right? And then also in some ways, it was like career fulfillment, or lack of thereof, right? Some of us have that. So what we wanted to do is be that voice to say we want to cut time in half for people, and then show people put action behind what we were just talking about. And then that essentially what we wanted to do is return back to home of why HBCUs were founded, right? So we can go back to our communities and make change. So essentially what HBCU Wall Street is on a mission to do that, right? Talk about how we can use ownership, do for self, and then also we bring together how you find fulfillment and make sure you're really operating in your creative genius, but at the same time coming back and solving our issues in our own community.
Yeah, I think I totally agree, and I think you bring up, a really interesting point, especially being a HBCU grad yourself. Thinking about the experiences and what opportunities are actually happening on campus. I'm curious, Professor White, what's happening at FAMU in the entrepreneurship space for students?
Sure. So there are there's again the continuum, right? So we're in the middle of building the entrepreneurship ecosystem at FAMU. There is academic courses, so there's an entrepreneurship elective. There are co-curricular opportunities with the entrepreneurship club, a registered student organization. But I think the reach becomes more impactful when we look outside of the classroom and really see what is the ecosystem, what's happening across campus, and FAMU's interplay with entrepreneurial ecosystems within the community. And there are several opportunities that the university is pursuing to do that. And one of them is actually in partnership with the EDA, a federal agency. So FAMU is one of the university centers that the EDA funds to really look at building entrepreneurship ecosystems on university campuses. And one of the programs through that is called REACH. So it's a regional entrepreneurship accelerator program. And the idea is to introduce students to concepts like rapid prototyping and build days. And these are esoteric terms that more of us need to be familiar with. And so being a part of this building of the ecosystem on campus, but also ensuring that we are building relationships outside of campus, I think is really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things that's always interesting about entrepreneurship in the academic setting is that it's shaped differently everywhere. It's sometimes in the School of Business, it's sometimes in communications. But what we do know is that entrepreneurship spreads across all the different units and departments that are within schools. Dr. Wilbon, what is happening at Howard, and how do you address that from not only the College of Business standard, but also just across campus?
Yeah, we're doing similar things as FAMU. We're doing a lot of understanding of what the needs are of the students. Again, we've spent a lot of time over the years focusing our students on going into corporate America. And in recent years, we're starting to realize we need to give them a little bit of a spark to consider entrepreneurship as an option for them. So in recent years, about 3 or 4 years ago, we started an entrepreneurship concentration where any student in the School of Business can do a concentration in entrepreneurship by taking 4 additional classes that we've created specialized in that area. We also have, I created, for example, 2 or 3 years ago, an entrepreneurship lecture series where we're bringing in entrepreneurs who are successful, and they can talk to students about their journey, what their pitfalls were, what things worked for them and what didn't. And I think that's important for giving them some students insights on what the path is going to look like. And it's not always going to be pretty. The School of Business is not only as you just mentioned, Frank, not the only thing or the only entity on campus that does entrepreneurship. Engineering's doing it. They do things around lean startup and innovation. The School of Communications is doing it. In fact, we have a endowed chair of entrepreneurship in the School of Communications, which the responsibility of that person is to kind of pull together all the resources on campus around entrepreneurship to make sure we're all in the same boat or going in the same direction in that vein. And of course, the School of Business also has a Small Business Development Center, which is the Small Business Development Center for the City of DC, sponsored by SBA, but it's housed within the School of Business at Howard. So we have created a kind of an ecosystem, as was mentioned earlier, that encompasses a lot of different entities and people across campus to try to build this environment that infuses entrepreneurship into the students and also provide them with the resources that they need to be successful in doing that.
Yeah, and I think that's been an amazing part of the things that I've learned since I've come to Howard. Sticking with you, Dr. Wilbon, what's the future of the programs? We talked about them being cross-collaborative right now. Is it further doubling down on that cross collaboration? Is it the creation of actual degrees versus concentrations? What are your thoughts on the types of programs that would be geared toward the future entrepreneurs of America?
I think curriculum is part of it. I think curriculum is important, but we're trying to do that. We're trying to build in curricular and co-curricular activities around entrepreneurship. But I think also most importantly, we have to build in exposure for students to learn and to build their products. So labs, kind of student labs for entrepreneurship, experiential learning opportunities. get them embedded in what it looks like to be an entrepreneur, as opposed to just focused on the theoretical aspects of the classroom. Give them some practice in doing that. And we do that in a number of different ways, by connecting them with entrepreneurs, bringing them on to campus, creating projects that they can actually get their hands dirty on. For example, we have a hackathon that we have every year that we bring students from actually around the region, some across the country, to work on projects over a 24-hour period with the intent of them head down, focusing on real world solutions to a problem, and which eventually will hope lead to a business opportunity for those students. So again, we have to do a balance of things: co-curricular, extracurricular, curricular activities, but also experiential learning. And I think that's the only way this is going to work.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Professor White, same question for you. What does that look like at FAMU?
Great question. We are seeing a lot of corporate partners come in who would offer case study and simulation opportunities. And I think we'll get into this in a bit, but it's the companies that have this culture of innovation that it fits. It just feels right that these case study opportunities are gearing up and they're cropping up. So it's those types of programs, because it's easier for a student to say, oh, I learned a little bit about this in my corporate finance class, and this is how I can instill or incorporate what I've learned in other classes into this entrepreneurial endeavor. And I think that's sometimes what happens, where students think, okay, I'm just here to check the box for this marketing class or check the box for accounting or for finance. But it's not until, to Dr. Wilbon's point, that there's an experiential opportunity where they get to apply what they've learned in these other classes, so that they see that this is important to how I succeed in my entrepreneurial journey. So there are a lot more case study programming opportunities that are cropping up on campus at FAMU.
So in general, what I'm hearing is that there's a relationship and really a strong balance that has to happen between the academic side of learning the pieces that are important to being an entrepreneur, as well as in integrating the right relationships with corporations and organizations that can give you the hands-on experience that you need to be successful, correct?
Absolutely.
And so looking over at HBCU Wall Street, I'm curious, as our representative organization here, how did you guys start? And what was it that, how did your HBCU experience support you in that?
That's a great question, Frank. In an odd way, I think it was opportunity-based and needs-based, right? Being from low-income communities or first-generation college students, right? You weren't exposed that much to entrepreneurship, right? So it's kind of retrospective of each other, right? Because you're now in college and you have to learn to maneuver through it, right, in a fiscally responsible manner. Entrepreneurship, which is the second nature of our people, right? Like we learn to survive in whatever situation we're put in, right? So you build things when you need them. And that's when the best things are built, when the founder had a problem that he had to fix, right? And so for me, we wanted to couple that with a paradigm shift in your mind, right? That financial literacy is a fundamental foundation of entrepreneurship, which is really the moving needle metric in community expansion, in community ownership. And being that's at the top of the totem pole as far as importance, our financial literacy rates are at the bottom, right? So that's where we had the marriage of the two, of entrepreneurship and financial literacy, right? The byproduct of us teaching and preaching and educating individuals about financial literacy, the byproducts of us sharing our life as we walk through it was entrepreneurship, right? So our HBCU experience heavily influenced it.
Yeah. And so are you guys, how do you guys engage with HBCUs right now? How do you, what does your relationship look like in ideal situations to support students in this way?
So some things that we've done in the past pre-COVID, we've been able to do HBCU tours where we've gone and facilitated panel discussions or just kind of workshops on the importance of entrepreneurship, financial management, financial literacy. So we've been to campuses like Howard University, who's been huge in pushing the movement for entrepreneurship. Hampton University. We've even gone down to Shaw University at Atlanta, where we hit all those universities. So just being able to build those relationships with the student base, and in addition to the faculty, is some of the ways that we've been able to push our message and our movement.
I think that's huge, and it's really great work to do. So hats off to you both. Dean Wilbon, thinking, expanding on that, how are HBCUs in general, and even, of course, the School of Business at Howard, partnering with corporations and that growth between the students and the relationship there?
Well, of course, corporate partnerships are critically important to what we do as a School of Business. And one of the things we're trying to do, again, as we start to expand our footprint in entrepreneurship within the building and the School of Business in general, we're looking for partners who can help us do that as well. And I can give you a couple of examples. For example, we just received a $20 million gift from Marriott. And their goal primarily is to create a pipeline for students who want to go into hospitality leadership. So we're trying to create a space for them to be exposed to experiences and decision-making for executives in the hospitality space. But in addition to that, we want to also add to that goal of Marriott, beyond just executive training, is the whole concept of hotel ownership, right? So how do we fuse hotel ownership into that message so the students can not only just focus on, again, as we talked about earlier, getting jobs into the corporate space, but how do we provide them and position them to develop the skills or the resources, the financing, and the thought process of creating their own hotel space. And so we're working with a couple of different companies around that, and we're trying to make that as part of the center for hospitality leadership that Marriott just funded. And so we're doing that with a lot of companies. As companies come in to recruit our students, again, they're interested in also, even within themselves and within their corporate structure, building this entrepreneurial thinking and giving students these opportunities to grow and innovate and learn on their own. And so we have to kind of push them along in that regard as well. So we're working with corporate partners to do that on an ongoing basis, but they're also leaning on us to let us know that that's something that they want as well.
Yeah, and I think that, the growth and the ladder, between how individuals go through the corporations and can climb that ladder can lead to entrepreneurship. Professor White, I remember you talking a little bit about the particular ways of entry. Can you share just a little bit about what you think the paths are to get into entrepreneurship?
Sure. I think as far as those pathways are concerned, this is another hot button debate issue, is like, do you pursue your passion on your path to entrepreneurship, or do you look in the market for a problem? And I think what we really want to be able to do in academia is determine and discuss with our students that for everything that you love to do, there is already a business around that. And so those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive the way that we've talked about them in academia as much. So you can pursue your passion as long as you're able to articulate the problem that you're going to solve in pursuit of building a business or starting your entrepreneurial journey along the pathway that says, this is what wakes me up in the morning. This is what's going to get me to be engaged in class so I can master this on my entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I think that is such a critical point. And you touched on something that's really important to understand, that even in the entrepreneurship spirit, it's not just about starting a business, but it's about finding the gap and finding what's missing in the workspace and in that industry, so you have a business that thrives. And a lot of times that does mean climbing the corporate ladder and going through and working to have some experience to identify what that is. I know in my own entrepreneurial journey, that's the case for me. I wasn't ready when I came out of college to have those ideas and step out that way, but it was through working in the industry and finding a way that I identified a gap. And I've identified something that was missing in my community. And I remember an entrepreneur, a Black entrepreneur, said these words to me, and it changed my life forever, which was the reason why he became an entrepreneur was because he saw that there was a problem in the world and he wanted to fix it. And for me, that resonated. And so a lot of what my journey had become was the idea that, there's a problem and I need to do something to fix it. And I know that both Jamaris and Torrance, talked about how that fueled the start of their business as well. One of the things that I think is important to also discuss is the kind of the relationship of the corporate partnerships that do happen. One of the responsibilities I have at Howard is, of course, brand management, and I work very closely with my colleague in corporate relations, who we identify the right type of relationships that have to happen between corporations. We're in a situation now where it's topical, and I'm happy that it is, and that we're at the forefront of pushing the narrative of supporting HBCUs. But we're Howard in general, we're not interested in just singly momentum moments where it's a dollar amount that doesn't really push the needle forward. It's not comprehensive in how the relationship needs to be developed, because we're tackling a problem that has existed for Black Americans for 400 years. We can't expect that a couple things that happen over the course of the next 5 to 10 will fix that. And so when we look at those corporate partnerships, I'm always asking the question, okay, well, past the dollars, what's the commitment to the students? We think about those entrepreneurship paths too, and getting students in the jobs and getting the experience, getting them to build their resumes helps them along the way for any industry. And I think that that's the part where the partnership has to happen. There's a benefit to students going to get those jobs at these white corporations, so they're able to learn and be able to make the decision on where they're going to go from there. And I think that that's a part that's really important, as well as the fact. So it's more than just a dollar that can be spent toward it. It's also about how you spend those dollars. It's about Dean Wilbon said earlier, the fact that there is an endowed chair of entrepreneurship at Howard University allows us to continue that work and to bring the business community closer. More of that type of action continues to make it so it's not, again, 1 or 2 year thing. It's something that will continue to grow and continue to have more staff and more business folks that we can bring under the fold of not only at Howard, but at every HBCU to train and bring people closer to that relationship. And of course, ways that we can give that hands-on experience is very integral to a very solid corporate partnership. Dean Wilbon, do you agree there? Or, how do you look at corporate relationships, when you think about Howard University?
100% agree with you, Frank. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anytime a company comes to engage with us, I make it clear to them that we're looking for a sincere partnership, and that does not include, again, just the financial commitment. Our students are very savvy, and so even they recognize when a company is coming in just to drop off some brochures and disappear, or just to come in and give us $5,000 for a scholarship and we never hear from them again. In order to engage students on HBCU campuses and Howard in particular, the company has to commit time and energy to helping us develop the students so that they can get the skill sets they need when they get into these corporate spaces to succeed. And so we emphasize that quite a bit. Not only do we emphasize their engagement and their investment and their time, the dollars are also important, but the dollars, as you suggested, need to be committed in a specific kind of way. And so, for example, any of the commitments that I've gotten in the recent months from companies, I encourage them to invest in endowments, because that money creates an opportunity for us to have programs in perpetuity, long term. It's not something that we can spend in 5 years and it goes away. So if somebody gives me, for example, I'll show the Marriott case again, or we have funding from a company called HBS Partners in finance, gives me $20 million and I put it in an endowment, that generates $800,000 a year forever, right? And so I can have a program for a person in place to support these students. We can have scholarships to support these students in various areas. That's a much more significant partnership. And then they bring in their people to help us build the program, to help us build curriculum, to help us train the students, workshops, boot camps, you name it. That's the kind of corporate partnerships we need, not the one and dones.
Yeah.
To even take that a step further, Jamaris and I usually speak to equity and ownership, right? Even if you don't give up equity of a 100-year-old institution. What you can do is make a pledge and stand behind it that path of entrepreneurship often ends to a point of decision-making capabilities for us.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, to piggyback off that, like I totally agree about the whole endowment piece. So like when we're having these type of discussions about corporations or equity, how can you help HBCUs in an equitable manner? I always look at it from multiple facets, right? So you touched on the point about the importance of making sure they're contributing back to the endowment, right? Then I start looking at it from the parent standpoint, right? Like how do you reward the parent or get me excited about sending my kids to an HBCU? So if I'm working at one of these corporations, do you have scholarships that for employees that have kids that want to go to an HBCU, that are going to HBCU, right? So then I look at it from the employee lens, like, are you creating pathways or pipelines for me to get to the C-suite? Everyone that walks into a corporation, that's the first thing you think, how I'm climbing the corporate ladder. Are there ways to get there, right? Then also, let's say for the everybody, we can have this argument about is everybody an entrepreneur, yes or no, but for the people that are in a corporate space that do have entrepreneurial thinking, put them on capital risk projects where they can go solve a problem within their community, where they're from on an HBCU campus, letting them pull together their own team to develop these skills that we talked about, right? So then from the entrepreneurial lens, like I can go off about this one, but like as we're talking about how can they help the entrepreneur out or a local business owner, right? This is when we start talking exit strategies, I'll lead off with this one, right? When you're going to do mergers and acquisitions, why not buy a Black-owned organization, right? There's organizations that are doing what you need or have the advanced technology that you need. Then why not buy them? Now you're circulating wealth back into the economy or the Black community, right? Then talking about franchises, if you're a major corporation that offers franchises, then create opportunities for some of your Black employees or people to become a franchise owner, right? These partnerships that we're talking about, right? I want a partnership where I'm vertically integrated within your platform, right? Give me a partnership where I am an important piece of your puzzle, to how you do business, right? So when we start talking about all of these things, I'm thinking equity, but it looks differently. Even from a political standpoint, what about super PACs? That's another way that you invest back into the community, but from a different lens. So, whenever we talk about equity and corporations, I think there's multiple ways that you can do this to where you can contribute back to the community. So it just depends on what lens are you talking from, who you're talking about, and where that equity plays a part.
Yeah, and you hit the nail right on the head right there. So a part of this too, is thinking through what's missing and what the gaps are. Speaking for myself, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and I didn't grow up in the best situation all the time, and for me, I happen to be lucky enough to have some mentors that spoke life into me, that made me believe in myself a little bit more. But we know that there's a systemic racial issue that plays into the barriers of, why people don't get into Black entrepreneurship. And aside from not having the same opportunities as many of the white students that were around me, and I went to a predominantly Black high school. Specifically, I had a kind of a psychology issue too, of believing and feeling like I should even be worth that. Professor White, what are your thoughts on that?
I actually am deeply moved by the psychology of Black entrepreneurship. When I applied to my doctoral program, I went in really wanting to understand the identity piece of it. And so what I've learned is that we certainly have to construct an identity as an entrepreneur. And there was a student that I crossed paths with maybe 5 years ago, and she's a allied health student. She was in physical therapy. And I always am trying to encourage the entrepreneurial mindset. So not just in the entrepreneurship class. And I asked her, have you ever thought about owning the physical therapy rehab facility? And she laughed. And she said, Ms. White, I can't own a business. I'm not a business student. And my heart broke because at some point in the system, someone did her a disservice. It could have been me, because maybe I didn't have the conversation with her early enough in the semester to empower her and to empower other students to help them understand that you don't have to be a business student to be an entrepreneur. And I think one of the things, like going back to the point of psychology and mindset and identity, is we understand that entrepreneurial exposure is key, but it doesn't always have to be in your family. It needs to be in the communities where you are. So for what HBCU Wall Street is doing, that is so important for us to be able to have these conversations earlier, even if no one in your family is that entrepreneurial mentor. So the mentorship piece, it really can drive the mindset, and then the claiming of our identities as not just entrepreneurs, so to speak, but wealth creators. And I think we also need to make sure that we're extending the conversation beyond just entrepreneurship and what I'm going to do in my lifetime, but how what I'm going to do in my lifetime is going to impact future generations and move down the generational chain.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And even again in my personal life, my father was an entrepreneur, and although I saw him as that, because of the systemic problems that I saw him have to fight every single day for, it was discouraging at that time, because I saw him, he didn't have support, and he did so much on his own, without having any of the support that we're talking about now, that it actually scared me away from it until I developed enough understanding of how I could be successful at that. Torrance and Jamaris, do you resonate with that at all?
That resonates loudly with us, right? Twofold, right? The first being, one of the first books that Jamaris and I ever wrote was called Guidelines to Get Off the Sidelines, right? And the mantra behind it was, if these white guys can get billions and get funded to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, then why not us, right? And so we've always just charged forward with this, well, if they can do it, if they're entitled to it, so are we, right? And that kind of lends to the psychology of seeing it done, being placed in an experience on top of being made to think and being shown to believe that you can do it as well, right? And so that was a secondary basis for our traveling HBCU Wall Street Talks panel, right? Where we went to maybe 12 different HBCUs, and we brought influential leaders and entrepreneurs and financiers throughout the city. It was literally to show those students people that looked like them that had been successful, right? So nothing happens without the paradigm shift. And the first part of that is the actual sight of it, right? So that resonates very loud.
The struggle seems to be similar for us all. Dr. Wilbon, what are recent grads, what are their trials and tribulations and the problems that they're having in today's age?
Yeah, and what the other panelists have said is spot on. We are still struggling, trying to overcome psychological hurdles in the corporate space and entrepreneurial spaces and so forth. And this is a multi-century long issue that we've dealt with. And it kind of goes back to, I love to use this term that was created by W.E.B. Du Bois back in 1903 with his book Souls of Black Folks. That whole concept of double consciousness, how we look at each other, or we look at ourselves through the lens of other people. And usually that lens is through people who are critical of us or oppressive to us. And we're constantly trying to measure up, figure out how we fit in, how can we please this other person or fit into their space. Our kids are still dealing with that today in 2021. And as your colleagues and your panelists just mentioned, they're doing it in the entrepreneurial space, trying to overcome these psychological hurdles that we've been dealing with for centuries. And it creates lack of a better term, a schizophrenia or a mental illness among African Americans, because we're constantly trying to measure ourselves in this space and where people are looking at us with contempt. And when you get into the corporate space, it resonates loudly. You have students who are trying to do that at the same time, trying to advance themselves, trying to figure out how they fit in, downplaying what their cultural importance is to what they're trying to do. And that's some of the reasons that drive people out of corporate America and want to do their own thing, because they're looking for that independence. that way to that opportunity to create some autonomy, so they don't have to deal with those psychological barriers that are placed in front of them, or we're all growing up trying to deal with it. I deal with it. Frank, you're dealing with it. Everybody on this panel has dealt with it at some point, and we have to figure out a way to get past it. I have no answers. I'm not a psychologist, but it's certainly something that we need to try to address and look at internally to develop our skill sets on.
Yeah.
And it's just to kind of add to that, I think that's a very important part as we start talking entrepreneurship. There's a lot of people that don't understand the importance of like self-care and how like as an entrepreneur, mental health is a very important piece. So, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about amongst ourselves and with HBCU Wall Street is bringing in that component, right? So you do have the mindset that you have to be able to have a certain amount of like grit as an entrepreneur that starts here. But in addition to that, as you're going through that process and hearing a lot of no's, what does that do for you? Especially if you're somebody, think about a lot of us that started off in the corporate space or have college degrees. You're used to being like top tier in what you do. So then when you go out here in your space, it's like, okay, no, you know what I mean? So then you got to start, you know, so that what that does to you, that's a component of the thing with entrepreneurship that's not being addressed about the mental health, the self-care component of that. And I think that speaks volumes to, you know, one, as being African-American in here, period, you're going to deal with that level of it anyway. So then you throw an extra, like, here's something else to throw on your plate. You want to be an entrepreneur, that's something that is worth talking about and start facilitating conversations around that component, mindset and mental health.
Yeah. You know, I think that, you know, well, one of the reasons why I even started my organization, DC Run Crew, was specifically to address the mental challenges and obstacles that we have that hold us back from being the best versions of ourselves. And I found that through physical activity, I was able to really significantly change how I even address my own works world, just because mentally I was used to challenging those thoughts. I was used to turning my nose into yeses. You know, running and specifically is all, you know, is for me has been the mental escape and also challenge, because I don't know another thing, or especially physical activity, that makes me not want to do it the moment I start doing it is running. And I found that every time that I got past that no, and the ability to say, I don't want to do this, it helped me mentally, which then fueled me in all of my other areas. You know, so there's this invisible kind of barrier that exists in the psychology and some of the systemic issues that we've had. What about some of the physical ones? Are there tools that are actually, you know, missing at HBCUs or that we're locked out of? Professor White, what are your thoughts there?
I certainly think that there are some tools and some points of access that we're locked out of. And of course, there is the historical background of redlining and economic detours that still continue to impact the institutions and certainly the communities that we're in. I would venture to say, of course, where it comes to venture capital and venture funding, our students are not as well versed about what venture capital is. Our students are building businesses that aren't as scalable. And I would say on a whole, Black-owned businesses do not build in enough technology into how we operate our businesses to become scalable, which in turn makes us more investable. And so when we think about, when I'm engaging with students who don't know what a landing page is, or a lead magnet, or a sales funnel, I have to back out of what I want to teach to shore up their knowledge base so that we can talk about business model canvas or tech models or e-commerce. And so there are some fundamental things that, you know, that's why the ecosystem is so important, because on campus we get 16 weeks, we get 2 class meetings a week, and it turns out to only 40 hours of contact time in a semester. And it's not enough time for us to do it just in the classroom. That's why the ecosystems are important. The co-curriculars, the lecture series, the HBCU Wall Streets, the Blavities. That's why the Black entrepreneurship ecosystem is so important to what our students can do, because there's not enough time to do it in a one semester to shore up the skill set and the knowledge base that our students need, and our alumni, you know, our communities need to build scalable, investable businesses.
Yeah, Torrance and Jamaris, you guys talk a lot about venture capital, and funding in general. So what's the funding options that are available for students, and young alum and anyone who's trying to be in this entrepreneurship space?
That's funny you asked that. That's also part of the paradigm shift, right? Is understanding that you're not restricted to this one method of obtaining, startup capital or seed funding, right? Like there's various methods. There's venture capital, as Professor White mentioned. There are angel investors. Your peers may have money, right? Friends and family. The Obama Jobs Act has made, the limits on crowdfunding and the money you can raise from non-accredited investors, more readily available to anyone who has an idea, right? So, now more than ever is the time for you to be able to come forward with an idea to the world and they actually be able to legally give you money, right? So it's a lot of ways you can do it.
Yeah, one of the things that I think plays into this conversation is specifically also the circulation of the Black dollar, as a part of one of the ways in order to find capital, because venture capital is very hard to get. It's extremely hard, and I think that there's other ways that we need to address that situation. I've read a stat that essentially says that the Black dollar only circulates one time in the Black community, whereas in terms of the Latin community circulating 10 times, in the Asian community circulating 9 times, and an unlimited amount of times in the white community. And so that's a level of funding that just doesn't come back to Black America when you're talking about a population of people that have $1.3 trillion in buying power each year, yet only 2% of those dollars actually circulate back to the Black population. So Dean Wilbon, thinking about those things, what's the future of funding, and how does the alumni and the universities also grow together in this aspect, around finding new ways to fund these ideas?
That's great question, and I think there are a couple of different ways. First of all, let me just say that we are very hard on ourselves and critical of ourselves in terms of Black businesses. Some of it unjustified, some of it may be justified, and I'll start from a couple of different angles with this. We have companies that need our support on the one hand, and we should go to those businesses. We should give them our money. We should buy their products and services. But in terms of what Professor Wright just mentioned, we also need to give them support around financing and technology infrastructure as well. We have, for example, companies who during this COVID period, when we had to pivot and people started buying things through Uber Eats and those kind of things, we had restaurants who had no website presence. And so if they wanted to, people couldn't get access to them, which created a void for them, and those companies went out of business. So in terms of your question, I think that the venture capital piece is huge, but we have alum who can help us develop our own angel investment programs. We can pool our resources together. We can create scenarios where we can invest in HBCU businesses through our alumni networks, and build relationships with HBCUs to create those avenues to invest in these companies and give them not only the financial support, the technology literacy that they need, and other types of infrastructural needs to help them succeed. Our businesses are not going to be able to rely on their grandparents to give them $10,000 to start a business, or equity in their homes to help them start a business. That's just not how we are going to be able to make this happen. But we do have a network of successful people who can build opportunities and create angel networks to invest in businesses and keep those dollars circulating.
Yeah, and I think that's a great kind of piece there, because I mean, even Howard, our alumni relations team, just stood up a website to support and showcase Howard University alumni Black businesses. So there's a directory for at least the HU community to see who are their fellow alum who have businesses in these spaces. And I do totally agree, because if we don't have the funding to also support the ones that do exist, it's hard to add a lot more into it as well. Torrance, Jamaris, do you have something to add to?
I would just say that that's actually dope that they're doing that, and that's very important, right? So it goes back to that whole concept that everyone is not an entrepreneur, but everyone's entrepreneurial thinking, and then it goes back to maybe there's need to be a lot more education around investing, right? Venture capitalists, angel investing, so to your point, so more people that are sitting at in corporations that have these high-paying jobs, but want to, they like taking risks, like create those opportunities, right, for them. So I think that's very important what you said, and then it lends itself back to what Dr. White was saying, that creating those meaningful businesses, right, creating more business that people want to invest in, like. But it goes back again to that education on what does a scalable business look like? What does a 10x business look like? What problem are you solving? And so I think it's like a twofold conversation. I think it's a twofold education, and there may be opportunities for, as HBCUs are continuing to elevate and progress in the space, we start looking at, okay, one, financial literacy is the foundation, right? I think more HBCUs are starting to do that. So hats off to them. And then two, it starts becoming like, this is what an entrepreneur looks like. This is what an entrepreneur is. This is what a small business is, right? This is what a Fortune 500 IPO company looks like. So now you have levels into which you want to develop and grow into, right? And then on the other side, like the investor, like this is what an investor is. This is what this type of investor is. So when we get to these spaces, or that you want to do this, we're all creating this ecosystem, because that's all it's about, right? It's a big old ecosystem. You need the HBCUs.
I think it's somebody that's left out of the ecosystem often in these conversations, and that's the non-entrepreneurial person that has money, right? That's part of that flow. That's part of that ecosystem, right? You may not be an entrepreneur. You may not want to be in real estate. You may not want to run a business, right? But you have money that can contribute to the circle of the Black dollar, right? And so campuses such as FAMU, right, such as Howard, those ecosystems ultimately also draw in the alumni with money, right? And so, yeah.
So I have enough time for one more question that I want to ask all of you to answer. So let's think about the future. When we've established that we need to have sustainable partnerships, we need to have healthy relationships with corporations. And if you were sitting in front of a corporation right now, Professor White and Dean Wilburn, what would you tell that corporation in terms of the future of not only your own entrepreneurship programs, but what they need to do to create those sustainable partnerships with us? Professor White. Yeah.
I love Dr. Wilburn, you shared that you have the endowed chair. We need more endowed chairs for entrepreneurship in HBCUs. We need faculty members who are advocating for entrepreneurship education to have that support system, because many of us are working in silos because we're going against the grain of the traditional industrial era curricula. So if we're talking about corporations putting their money where their mouths are, it would be in endowed chairs, and it might also be in faculty externships to get faculty out of the textbook and into the applied workplace where we're cultivating our students to be. But our faculty need to see, is this relevant in the real world, and how do I bring that into the classroom and expose my students to that through academia? So endowed chairs and faculty externships.
Thank you. Dean Wilburn.
Exact same response. I think you hit it right on the head. Endowed chairs, endowed professorships, externships. And in addition to that, I'll also add helping us to build networks. Networking is important around not only within our campus, but even across HBCUs. One of the things that we tried to envision is, why can't we have an HBCU entrepreneurial network where all the HBCUs are sharing resources with each other on how to create entrepreneurship on individual campuses and in those communities where those campuses are located. Help us fund something like that. That would go a long way. So I'm spot on with Professor White. I think that's critically important what she suggested. But engage us, not just give us the money, but engage us. Help us figure out how to make this thing work. Because I think in the end, helping us build up Black entrepreneurship is going to benefit the larger society as well. So it's not operating in isolation. This is going to benefit everyone, the entire economy. So I think there's a reason for all companies and entities to invest in this.
Yeah. And Torrance and Jamaris, and thank you, Dr. Wilbon. Torrance and Jamaris, from your perspective, organizationally wise, what do you want to see more corporations doing for HBCUs?
I would want to see more of an emphasis placed on the fact that a lot of HBCUs have a forward-facing community entity, right? So some sort of external affairs or a community-based department that's supposed to sit in the middle and facilitate the community and the school growing simultaneously, right? And so the corporations could pump money into the schools and the community at the same time, because those would be specific based initiatives of making sure that the community and the school were in lockstep as far as they develop, right? Literally develop.
And a great example, kind of what Torrance is saying, but I got other examples. But like, as I think of a business that solves an issue, right? That's what I'm about, value-added solving issues. Think of a business, we're talking about a food conglomerate, right? And if these HBCUs are in food deserts, helping them create a grocery store there, right? And if you have a product or service, you put your product and service there. So that's the win-win for you, right? So so as I'm thinking through tangible solutions, just put together projects, capital projects. So now this is going to the employee level. And I think I mentioned a few examples earlier, but this kind of lends itself to like that where everybody becomes a full circle ecosystem, right? You put an example of a grocery store, they fund that, they allow somebody from the food beverage conglomerate to run that project. You let students run that. It's in the HBCU community, so like now that's helping locally, state, US, and global. So it's going back to your point that this is a win-win for everybody. It's not just a win for African Americans, Black people, but it's a win for everybody. And it's essentially, you can't mention HBCUs without mentioning the global impact that they've made. So why not start with like projects like this where it touches the whole HBCU ecosystem?
Yeah, I think everyone is just completely hit the nail right on the head there. And I feel like we can have this conversation all day long. But unfortunately, we're running a little bit out of time. So I just want to thank every one of our panelists for a really illuminating and inspiring conversation. From each of your different sets of experiences, you all talked about amazing ways that HBCUs and corporations alike are helping to promote Black entrepreneurship in today's society. The leadership style of HBCUs is predicated on really two things: their willingness to call attention to social problems and to generate solutions to fix them. There are tremendous disparities in professional opportunities for white students compared to students of color, from struggling to get that coveted internship to not having the financial resources to pursue unpaid or low-paying experiences. HBCUs have clearly articulated that a candidate's resume is not necessarily a reflection of their talent, but of the opportunities they've been allotted. HBCUs are dispelling the myth that there is this Black talent shortage. It's one of the things that I hate to hear when I speak with corporations, because in reality, there is a surplus of Black talent looking for opportunities that match their capabilities. HBCUs are helping create the pipelines for higher education to industries to close that gap and to eliminate the disconnect between companies seeking candidates and candidates looking for jobs. See, already HBCUs have made progress in leveling the professional playing field. There's so much more work that we have to do still. When we talk about the importance of Black entrepreneurship, we have to enhance equity and we have to enhance inclusion throughout our economy. We have to increase the representation and make our society more integrated. Whether that's by equalizing pay in white-owned companies or by helping Black men and women start their own businesses, we have to ensure that African Americans are maintaining a larger portion of the wealth that comes from our economy that they contribute, which currently, as I mentioned earlier, is about $1.3 trillion of the US economy. And only 2 cents of that, or 2%, is actually headed back to the Black community. We have to ensure that people of color are fairly compensated and that they acquire the resources needed to branch out on their own, start businesses that are essential to providing for people in their own communities. Again, Thank you for joining us. This has been an important conversation. And I want to thank Mountain Dew for sponsoring this really insightful panel, leading the charge and fueling real change. Of course, thank you to Blavity and Afrotech for lending us your platform to have such a dynamic and powerful conversation, and for your commitment to the issue. All of your support is truly paying dividends for the Black entrepreneurship movement, and we are all excited to see what the future holds for it. Whether your path to entrepreneurship begins during college, right after college, or later in life, know that there are resources available to support you along your journey. I encourage all current students and recent HBCU alumni to tune into the Real Change Ideas Pitch Competition in support of some of our next future leaders, airing on April 14th. Thank you, and we appreciate everyone joining us for this conversation.